I don't even know if the mic will have picked that up. I think the setting that I have it on can't do whispering. We'll find out. It's been so long. I don't know where I've been. Well, I do know where I've been. I've been very busy, but I'm thrilled to be back. I hope everyone is doing very well. I've had a very busy month in March with lots of events and days out and people coming to visit, people coming to stay. So yeah, it's been really wonderful. We've been very busy, but it's good for me. I feel like we're in dire need of a proper podcast style date because I've made wild progress actually on most of my whips, and I have quite a few new cast-ons actually to show off, and a small section of any other business, which I'm going to chat about towards the end because they are slightly irrelevant, but maybe they'll be interesting. So I've got to power through because my camera will only record 35 minutes of footage. So, so I've got to get going if I'm going to cover everything that's on my list. The first finished object is what I'm wearing, which I realised when I sat down is not a great idea because I can't really show it off properly while I'm sat here with it on. But this is the Planet Sweater by Laura Dalgard, which is actually my most recent finished object. This came off the needles maybe last week and then took about 4 days to block because it's so huge. And I don't have excellent ventilation in my flat, so things do generally take a while to dry, but this was a special case. I'm very glad with how it turned out though. It's really maybe the warmest thing I've ever owned. The yarn is Eastex Alphos which is a chunky weight yarn. And then I've used Eastex Let Lopi for some of the accent colours for a lot of the duplicate stitch, purely because they don't have as broad a colour range in the chunky Alphos Lopi. I think it's probably just not as popular as the Let Lopi, which is an Aran weight. It's actually exactly half the meterage, which is very helpful for me because it meant that I could double it up and work pretty much identically to how I would with Alphos Lopi. And I actually think it was a great choice. The recommended yarn for this is Hjertagarn Natural, I think it's called. It's the Hjertagarn Chunky. I think is it Fisherman's Wool? I don't even know. My Danish is poor, but that's not readily available where I am. And although I love it, and I think the colours and everything that we used in the original are fab, this for me was the best substitute. And actually, I just love the finish. I'll insert a bit of B-roll because I realised that having sat down wearing it, it's going to be quite hard to show off kind of all sides. So hopefully I'll give you a good view of the back and the sleeves as well, so you can see all of the colour work, which is very exciting. And the actual body of the sweater was very, very quick to knit. I think took me less than a week because it's on huge, like 8mm needles. And then it was just the duplicate stitch, which took the time, as anyone who has ever done duplicate will know. I did want to chat a bit about some of the amendments that I made from the pattern because fundamentally, I didn't follow the pattern at all. I used the charts and that was about it. In terms of the pattern instructions, I read it, I thought, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And then I just did my own thing because I have a tendency to do that. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. I felt like on this occasion it did, but I think if I were to do it again, there are a few things that I'd change. So the way that this pattern is constructed is as a bottom-up raglan. This is according to the original instructions. And the colour work on the body is worked as intarsia, but it's worked in the round, and you're instructed to cut the float at the end of every row of intarsia on the front and on the back. So you end up with two ends on the front and back at the end of each of the, colourwork sections for every single row. And personally, I just didn't fancy weaving those in. I think if I were to redo it now, I can understand that the intarsia looks a lot better and smoother and hangs nicer than duplicate stitch, because obviously with duplicate, you are changing the fabric with having, two strands of yarn on top of each other. which does make it fall differently in different places. I think because this is chunky, it already has quite a lot of structure, and so the duplicate kind of only adds to that, which is fortunate, really, in my circumstances. But the pattern recommended that you use duplicate for the arms rather than intarsia, which was what kind of made me think, well, I could just do it all in duplicate stitch and save myself the bother of having 3 million ends to weave in at the end on the body. I think the best way, if I were to go back and rehash this, would be to work out a way to maybe work it flat. I know that's really hard with raglans. I think there are ways I've thought about it that could work, doing kind of a combination of panels and in the round, but I haven't really fleshed that out yet. And I don't plan on it in this again, so I probably won't. But I think if anyone's thinking about it, it's worth noting that it works perfectly as a top-down raglan rather than bottom-up, because the instructions are to knit bottom-up, but personally, I just think raglans should be worked from the top down. They're kind of made to, it's so much more simple. You just know where you stand at all points with them. And I feel like you can control the fit a lot better. So that was what I chose to do, and it was very easy to just reverse the pattern and follow the instructions pretty much as they are, but obviously in a different order. And it turned out well. I think I'm very happy with it. I haven't taken it off all week, and I think it's looking even better every day. I think with this yarn, it looks the nicest when the fibers have had the chance to kind of fluff up a little bit. When you block it, it all kind of sits quite flat, obviously, because that's how it's dried, and it just needs a bit of wear and a bit of kind of like being tossed around to get it looking nice and hairy, which is the desired look for me for this, because it is a very, very rustic Icelandic yarn. And the benefit and the beauty of it, I suppose, is that it's incredibly warm. So I'll definitely get the wear out of it. I may have chosen a less than optimal time of year, but I don't regret it at all, because at least I can wear this and not need a coat. So that's a blessing. The second garment finished object which I have is actually my sweater number 9, which I think I did already wear in a previous episode, but I said I wasn't going to talk about it because I was saving it until now. This is by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and this is just the sweater number 9 in some leftover drops Nepal and drops Kidsil, which I had frogged from a previous project, and it worked very well. Again, this was such a quick project. Let me see how long it took me. So I started this one on January the 26th and then finished it on the 7th of February. So it was super speedy, but I think I've actually been wearing it a lot since I've finished it, and I wore it a lot more than the cardigan, which I sort of cannibalized it from, which was my whole intention, and I think it turned out really well. You can sort of tell. I actually haven't ever cannibalized a finished object before to reuse the yarn, and you can tell that it hasn't worn fantastically, but then this is not a very expensive or high quality yarn, and I suspect that that might be the reason. But I'm glad that I'm still just getting a lot of wear out of it. You can tell that it's pilled sort of a lot more quickly than it would have done if it was new, probably because it already had quite a few pills attached from when it was being worn in its previous form. But even then, I think there's no loss. Like, I'm happy to look after it, and it's just a lot more wearable in the form that it's in now. I actually love the fabric on this as well, because although it's Aran, it's knit on 7mm needles, which I generally wouldn't go for an Aran weight, but it does make this really nice drapey kind of loose fabric, and it's got these fantastic kind of raglan tram lines, which I think are a great effect. So that is another one to add to the collection that I'm very pleased with. And again, I'd say it's absolutely worth working up because it's so quick to finish. Now, I think I've had a lot of larger garment projects on the go recently, and that's kind of slowed down my progress a little bit with getting finished some of the things that were on my to-do list. But I did treat myself to this beautiful Zakami yarn when I was away in Edinburgh in February. And then I think as soon as I got home, I had to start something with it, because do you know when you just get something really nice and you're really excited to use it? And I knew that this was going to be a very quick project. And this is actually just a little bandana. So it can be worn as a scarf, or I haven't actually worn it on my head yet, but I imagine that that will be a good option too. I've never really owned one of these. I have lots of silk scarves, which I do wear, but never a knit one. The only similar thing I've really had would be small Sophie scarves or things that just tie around your neck, do you know? But I'm excited to see how I can use this, and I think the final fabric is just absolutely stunning. I didn't follow a pattern, I just kind of winged it. I started casting on at one end and then worked an I-cord edge on both sides at the same time and increased so that you've got a kind of right angle triangle and then decreased for the other side. And it was ever so swift. It was a great plane project. I was doing a lot of traveling in February, so I was spending a lot of time packing bags and hopping around and being sat on planes and at airports. And so that was actually something that was really handy to have on me to keep me ticking over while I was out of the house. Now, my interim mission is to tackle some of my more recent cast-ons slash whips. I do, very unfortunately, still have my long-term sweater number 26, which is, oh, just caught my jumper on the basket. It's fun. Which is still on the go. I have made progress. It's just taking its time. And I'm going to be really glad when it's done and then I can have it out of my hair. But I am finally on the second sleeve. So I have one sleeve completed. I have all of the body completed. And I've got this much of the second sleeve. And I know that I can finish this in a week if I really knuckle down and just crack on with it. But I've been getting a bit trigger happy with the cast-ons since finishing this project 2 weeks ago. So I've been kind of divvying my time out between all of those smaller projects, which has slowed it down. But I'm still very content and I'm excited to work on everything that I currently have on the go. This is going to be finished by the end of April. If it kills me, which it might do. But it's going to be a really lovely finished piece. I'm so happy with the way the fabric has worked up. I think the yarn's stunning. It's going to be incredibly warm. I think the pattern's great. When we block it, I'll get a better idea of, you know, what the size and the dimensions and all look like. But at the minute, it's fitting as well as I would expect for it just being, you know, unblocked. So that is almost going to be done. And it's made some good progress, but it's just not quite finished. I think in a previous podcast, I was talking about the Kaleido cardigan and how I had that as my designated stash busting, scrap busting project. And I've taken the executive decision to frog it and do something different with the yarn, mainly because I sat down a couple of weeks ago and filmed a bit of a pattern roundup with scrappy patterns, which was great fun. And I was so inspired by one of them that I had to cast it on there and then. And I realised that the Kaleido cardigan I hadn't really been getting on very well with because of the difficulty I was having with my hands trying to do two colour work. So I thought when I saw the Mitsoni sweater by Lindsay Deegan that I'd actually just much rather own that and work that up in the scrap yarn that I have, which a lot of it was exactly the right weight as well. It was, I think the pattern's for a worsted weight, but a lot of it is also DK. And I'm pretty sure it's on 4 or 4.5 mil needles, so the DK and worsted gauges are fairly similar, to be honest. So I've made a little collection of all of my scraps, which are the correct weight for that pattern, and I've made some progress. I'm thinking this is going to be a long-term pattern, so I'm not anticipating finishing this anytime soon. And I'm thinking just as I kind of accumulate more scraps in the right weight, I'm just going to add to it. And eventually, at some point, it will be finished. So this is what we have so far. This is just the bottom of the body. This pattern is worked in panels, so depending on how I feel about the colour combinations, it'll either be the front or the back. And yeah, I haven't decided yet. But I think it's turned out really nicely so far. The kind of herringbone chevron stitch pattern is very exciting to work on. It's kind of all the increases and decreases are worked on the right side and then it's just purled on the wrong side. But it flies by. I think that's the thing with stripes, especially when you're doing multicolored stripes and kind of thinking about color orders and color combinations. I'm just itching to change color. And so that means that I'm really plowing through it. So this was only started a few days ago, and I didn't really have any intentions of, focusing on it to get it done. But it's just been working itself pretty swiftly. So I'm very glad about that. There is also a little bit of the Eastex, which I've introduced, the Let Lopi, which is the worsted weight yarn, which was left over from this pattern. And then probably we'll just accumulate other things as I finish other projects, and that's going to grow organically on its own. I also realised that I had an abundance of Drops Air still left, which is quite a difficult yarn to use because it's a kind of blown alpaca yarn around a mesh core, which it's very, very similar to things like Lion Cloud and is Camera's Snafer the same? I'm not too sure. I've never seen it in person, but this is one of those very airy, lofty yarns, and it doesn't necessarily sit too well when it's being held with kind of traditional spun yarn. So I decided that I had enough to do a small enough project that I could just dedicate it all to the one garment. And for that, I have started the, what's it called? Croissant Cardi by Rose Knitwear. So this is a really interesting construction, and I haven't really worked anything similar before. But it's knit from cuff to cuff with a kind of flat panel in the middle, which forms kind of back and yoke section. I suppose it's almost a bolero, you'd probably call it, the style. But I have intentions for this in that I'm a very keen salsa dancer, and I needed something that I could use for salsa warm-ups, and I just thought that this kind of pattern would be the perfect kind of dance warm-up garment, and it would go perfectly with all of my more sporty salsa stuff that I have to wear. So that hopefully will be finished very soon. Again, it's on 8mm needles, so it's really, really chunky and hefty, and I'm holding the Drops Air double. But I've managed to get it to do this kind of mottled, stripy, kind of marled pattern, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm a big fan so far. I think it helps that all my colours were kind of similar tonally. So it's turning out pretty well, and I think it should be finished by the end of this week because really it's just been flying off the needles. And it's a very easy knit, just in stockinette mainly, either in the round or flat. I did adapt the pattern a bit because I think the whole thing is designed to be knit flat, but I just decided with sleeves, I can just do it round, and it really is fine. And so far, I've not had any issues, but we'll report back whenever it's finished, and I'll see what if it turns out as intended. Now, my final mini whip is actually just a very exciting little sock. I'm not a huge sock knitter, but I've really had a kind of desire recently to knit a sock in this particular colourway. Although, when the yarn arrived, I realised it's just giving Velma from Scooby-Doo. And so that was a bit devastating. But I do still love it, and I think I'll still wear it. But now that I've thought of them as the Velma socks, I don't think that will ever leave. So this is all I have so far. I'm working them from the toe up because I've recently learnt Judy's Magic cast on, and that's just revolutionised my sock knitting. I was previously a cuff down person only, but actually I'm really enjoying toe up at the minute just for fit and also for ease of measuring, lengths of your foot and ankle. So this is just a little made up stripy kind of pattern, which I've thought of. And what I'm hoping to do, I have equal quantities of these three colours, and I'm going to do matching, mismatching socks. So I'm hoping on the second sock to reorder the colours in the stripes so that they will appear as a pair, but they're going to be slightly different because I've been very inspired by that recently, and I think it's very fun, especially for small accessories. I like things which are a little bit asymmetrical, do you know? This is actually a new yarn, which I've never tried before, which is the Coop Knits. I think, is it Fibre Spates or Coop Knits? I can't remember if it's both of them. Soxier DK. And it's a very nice, really light, true DK. I find that a lot of them, especially if you hold together finger weight sock yarns, you end up with something a bit more worsted, and they're kind of quite rugged and very stiff fabric, which is not necessarily always ideal for socks, or that's the experience that I've had in the past anyway. But this stuff is absolutely beautiful and the fabric is so stunning. I'm especially loving this green colour here. I wish they made that in something that wasn't a sock yarn. I bet they do. So yeah, this is just my little work lunch break project, which is living in my work bag at the moment. I like something small that I can kind of carry around with me because I just like being able to switch off on my lunch and work a couple of rows. So although I've been powering through this since I cast it on yesterday evening, I think it might be take a little bit longer to get a full pair. But hopefully we'll get there in the end. And I'm very excited to see what they look like finished. I think I may have slightly overestimated the number of stitches I needed for double knit on 3.5mm needles because I've started with 56 and I usually wear 64 stitches on a classic fingering weight sock yarn on 2.5mm needles. So I feel like these might be a little bit large, but I don't think I'll be too bothered by that because if there's one thing I'm great at, it's shrinking things in the wash. So I'm sure after a few wears, they'll be the perfect fit. And if they end up being boot socks, walking socks, that type of thing, then more the better, because I'll definitely get the wear out of them around the house. So very fun. Now, I'm sure you might know by now, but I'm not a huge yarn buyer. But this month, I actually have 2 whole acquisitions of sweater quantities of yarn, which I have bought. Now, the first one is in fact not for me. This is a present for somebody else, and this is yarn at their request. So this yarn was in fact not my choice, but I pledged to do a chunky edition of the Lulu slipover for my mum because she's been really wanting a sweater vest for a long time and been asking for it a lot. So I said that this spring would be the time. And she's chosen this shade of Drops of Pool, which I believe is called Moss Green. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera because I found that the photo online, I did buy it online, was actually very different from how it looks in person. It's definitely more of a lighter sage green, but I wouldn't call it a pastel. I think it's a really nice shade though. But I think if I'd have just seen it online, I probably wouldn't have chosen it myself. But I'm glad that I know what it looks like in reality now. So I think I have 12 balls of this because for some reason the Lulu slipover eats yarn. I don't know how a sleeveless jumper can possibly use so much, but apparently it does. So I suppose I'll see when I cast it on if we actually get through this. I imagine we will. I think the pattern is actually fantastic, and it's not necessarily something that I would wear myself, but I'm really glad that I get the opportunity to try and make a version, because that is part of the joy of it, really, for me. I do enjoy doing a bit of gift knitting throughout the year. I tend to just limit myself to maybe 2 or 3 pieces for different people, though. So I think that'll be a really exciting cast on. And I'm hoping to find some nice buttons as well because it requires 4 buttons for the closures under the arms. And now I haven't actually bought the pattern yet, but as far as I can work out, it's basically knit from the top down in 2 separate panels because the underarm seams aren't actually joined, it's just a button closure. And I'm planning on finishing it with a folded crew neck rather than the roll neck or polar neck type thing that is actually part of the pattern. But I've seen a lot of other people's projects on Ravelry which convert it to a crew neck, and I think they look fab. And I also think it would just be better for a kind of spring summer jumper vest than something that's, you know, high polar neck, which is generally very warm. And then for me, I have a very exciting purchase, which I believe I did talk about in my 2025 plans video. And I wasn't necessarily planning on casting it on straight away, but the shop which I usually buy Scandinavian yarns from had the exact quantity as the kind of final quantity in the colorway that I wanted. Let me grab it. So I felt a little bit compelled to buy it while they had it in stock. And I'm very glad I did because I think it's beautiful. Now, this is Ralma Final in the shade Light Moss Green, I believe. And I'm hoping with this to make the Zachary cardigan by Noriko Ichikawa, which I think just looks like a fab pattern, and I'm definitely in dire need of more cardigans. I only own one at the minute, and it's just not good enough. So this should be a nice kind of springtime edition. I think the colour's fab. It's a very warm grass green, which is not necessarily what you think of when you think moss, I suppose. I don't know, maybe some people do. I'm a big fan of the colour though. This is Fennel, and I'm hoping to hold it double so that you end up with a kind of worsted weight in the end. But I'm going to do a bit of gauge swatching just to be sure that I'm spot on. And then I think I got some buttons as well. Oh yes, I remember these. So I've just bought kind of tortoiseshell buttons, which I think will go really nicely with the yarn. And I was kind of torn, I think in the pattern sample on Ravelry, she uses a kind of coconut shell button, but I couldn't quite find anything similar. But I do know that if I sort of decide that I might want to look for a different button, I'll absolutely use these for something else. So that's definitely a goer. And I'm hoping that I'm going to get the chance to cast this on whenever I've finished a couple of my whips, which are all nearly finished. So hopefully during April, I can make a good bit of progress on this. And now, in other exciting news, it was my birthday last month, and the best present that I received was this drop spindle. I'm easily pleased. And I also received a top of pre-blended fibre. I can't remember the name of the supplier. I did choose this myself as a disclaimer. I did know that I was getting it as a present, but I did manage to choose it myself, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out because I think it's absolutely stunning. Now, it's definitely been a learning curve because I had never tried to spin anything before I got this. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of tutorials and little snippets of advice, and I feel like I am getting the hang of it. But I know that my first attempt is not ever going to be the best thing I can produce. But I'm still hoping that I'm going to be able to make something nice and worthwhile out of it. Now, I think I'm 2/3 through this. This was 100 grams, and I think this is the last third left. I have a third which has already been skeined up and steam set and everything. And then I just need to do the same with this that's already on the spindle before I can start spinning this up. But it's actually very cathartic, and I would recommend it to anyone who hasn't tried it before, because I think when you're feeling like a bit of a change of pace, but you still want to do something crafty, it's a nice little diversion, but you still get a brilliant end product that you know that you're going to use. And I am by no means expecting to start hand spinning everything that I'm going to use, all the yarn I'm using for the future. But for the odd project, I think it's really nice to be able to do something that you know you've done from scratch. I would love to be able to start blending my own fibre, because obviously I bought this pre-blended because I don't have any of the equipment or infrastructure that you need to be able to do that. And luckily, World of Wool, that's who it's from. Luckily, World of Wool have some really, really stunning pre-blended tops in lots of different fibres. And I would recommend them wholly if you're in the UK. I believe this drop spindle is actually one of their own as well. And I think they sell in 3 different weights. So this is the middle weight, which I believe is 40 grams, but I might be making that up. With this yarn, I was kind of attempting somewhere between a worsted and Aran weight, but it's a little bit variable. More so in some places than others. I did watch some great videos that hopefully I might put a few links below if anyone's interested, just in learning to spin and getting consistency, because that's kind of what I've been focusing on. But then that being said, I barely spun 100 grams, so I know that I'm not going to be an expert at this point. But this is what I've ended up with so far. And I think it's turned out beautifully. My idea for this is maybe to combine it with a normal yarn and use it for just a jumper vest or something small. I was thinking about a hat, and then I thought I just don't really need another hat. But I think I'd rather use it in maybe some colour work, or I don't know. I'm gonna have to think. It's all very exciting though. And now for a bit of any other business. This weekend is the first weekend in a while where I have no plans. Let's hope. So I've decided I'm going to dedicate it to a bit of knitting admin, because there are 2 pieces in my wardrobe which I just feel need some small adjustments to make them really wearable. And I think it was Florence Miller who is running a CAL at the moment, where the whole idea of the CAL is that you take a finished object and you make the necessary adjustments to make sure that you'll actually wear it again. So it could be things like, changing the style of the cuffs or the collar, or adding a bit of length, or maybe even just reblocking something, or it could be mending, fixing holes, fixing worn parts. And these two jumpers, I've just decided that there are a few minor details that if I really knuckle down, it would probably take me less than a day to fix both of them. So I'm just going to commit to doing that this weekend, and then hopefully I will end up with something which is more wearable than the previous garment. So the first one, I don't believe you've seen before because this was a finished object from last year. And this is actually the Sand Sweater by Ullen Knitwear, which is done in stripes with BC Garn Loch Lomond for the kind of burgundy red colour, and then Noro Ito for the colourwork stripes. And I don't think it will get past you that it's quite obvious what the problem with this is. Spot where I lost yarn chicken. And now I've realised that if I were to just go back and unravel the last inch of the body on this, I recently have acquired some more Noro, this stuff. I think if I were to insert a stripe in the right kind of section of the yarn, because there is this kind of pinks and purples bit in the taksaki, I think it would be really unnoticeable if I just added a stripe to the bottom of this. I believe the colorway of this Noro is Yuruma. I might be wrong there. It was a long time ago. But especially since it's just 4 rows and it would be very easy to do, I think it would be a shame not to try. And I just think the beauty of this is that the colours are so different all the way throughout, and it wouldn't be that noticeable if I changed to a different colourway just for the last band, because there are a lot of colours which are shared in both the yarns. So that is my plan. Now, my only issue with this pattern is the fact that it has a tendency to flare on the base of the body, because it obviously has no ribbing, it just has this double folded stockinette hem. But I find that because of that, the ribbing is not there to kind of pull in the bottom of the body. So especially at the centre front and centre back, when you're wearing it, it kind of flares almost like an A-line sort of shape, which I'm not the biggest fan of, especially I think in this fabric and with the size that I made this pattern in as well. So what I'm planning on doing, just to add a little bit extra length, is to rip back slightly, insert a new colour stripe, and then add a chunk of 1x1 rib just on the bottom of the body. There is the same kind of cuff finish on the neckline and the sleeves, but I don't really mind them being different because I think it's also very functional on those parts. So I'm thinking that that's really not a lot of work just to do that little bit extra, which will kind of revolutionize the wearability of it as well. So I think it's 100% worth it. And the only other little admin project that I have, I know this is a very recently finished object too, but after wearing it for a few weeks, I've realised that the arms are just too long, and that's fine. And what I can do very simply is I've marked here where I think the arms need to be frogged back to. But obviously I'm going to frog back a bit further than that and then repeat the ribbing for the cuff and the rolled edge. So overall, I'll probably just be removing 6 or 7 centimeters worth of work, but it will make the world of a difference because at the moment, I think it's not an especially oversized jumper and it's not an especially long body. So with the arms being so ridiculously long, it kind of just looks like I'm flapping around whenever I'm wearing it and walking. So especially with the wider sleeves too, I think having them hit sort of where this one does, just above the wrist bone, will be perfect. And it will make me feel a lot better when I'm wearing it too, because the last thing I want to do is have something that's sat there that's not getting worn. That's just a crime in my book. I would be really interested to know if anyone has any other similar admin projects that you're planning on taking on in the next few weeks. I'm a big advocate for making small adjustments and going back and fixing garments to make them more and more wearable. So I would love to know if there's anything that's been bothering you and maybe you've been inspired to sort of take a couple of hours and commit to just fixing, one issue that you might have with something. So let me know what it is and let me know what you're doing and let me know why you've been putting it off as well, because I am definitely guilty of that. I absolutely try and wear things knowing that they're not quite right, and it might go on for weeks and months, and then I realise, God, I really should just actually get around to doing that. So that is my pledge for this month. I feel like next time we might have a few more finished objects because there's a lot of whips which are getting very close to being done. And then hopefully I'll also have some new cast-ons as well. I'm, as ever, interested to hear what's going on in your lives. What have you been up to? Has anyone got any nice new acquisitions that I need to know about? That's of the utmost importance. And just have a chill time. I hope that you're still enjoying using crafts to relax and unwind, and especially with a new season, I think that's the perfect time for a fresh start and a bit of a push. So leave me a comment and I'll try my best to say hello to everyone. But yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time. Have the best week.